Good afternoon, or almost good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Accomplices for Justice. This is our sixth. Can you believe it, Pastor Hughes? Sixth.
Take six.
We are almost on May the 4th be with you and Cinco de Mayo, and here we are in our sixth conversation. So
Yeah. How
a
about
lot
that?
going on this week. Of course,
Yes,
today is
indeed.
May Day. I imagine we could have something to talk about if we wanted to really rub people the wrong way and talk about communism and socialism and such things. Uh,
The dreaded C word, huh?
uh, oh God, there's so many dreaded C words. So in any event, Accomplices for Justice is the brainchild of Reverend Dr. Wiley Hughes and myself, Rabbi Jonathan Freirish. Reverend Dr. Wiley Hughes or Pastor Hughes, or how would you prefer us to refer to you, Wiley?
Wiley.
uh, I like to say Pastor Hughes because I am very conscious of people's titles
Yes.
because uh, honestly, for a really serious feminist reason, which is the degree to which women's titles are often ignored while men's are often emphasized. So
Hmm.
no matter how often I introduce myself as Jonathan, people will usually insert Rabbi Freirish.
Hmm.
And no matter how often some of our women colleagues introduce themselves as Reverend or Pastor, they will almost always, or Rabbi, they will almost always be diminished to title plus first name or just first name. So
Hmm.
it's easy for me to sacrifice something that people won't take from me, but I'm going to hold on to it for everyone for the sake of making sure that everyone gets it equally.
I
So,
appreciate that. So in that case, call me Pastor. Pastor Hughes is good. And it's interesting you
uh,
said that because in the African American community, uh uh that is like the ultimate sign of disrespect not to give someone their proper honorifics. And there was a time when I first got ordained that you had to call me Reverend, and and because I earned it and I worked hard for it. And it's only recently that I've sort of relaxed a little bit, like, okay, chill, you're okay. But in our community, when I was in seminary versus when I was in college, all of the African American professors wanted them to be called professor. You call me professor, and if I have a PhD, you call me doctor, and if I had a whatever, you call me a reverend. So it was, you're right. It was one of those things where, in our tradition, in our history as African Americans, our titles were often diminished, right? And so we were called boys instead of men,
our,
and gals instead of women. So it was, yeah. It's interesting that you brought that up.
Okay, so I'm letting everybody in. Bruce, we are going to ask you to stop your video because we're gonna and Charlotte as well and Gerard. And then we'll have everybody join in for questions later on. And in the meantime, uh, I am we did introductions, so we're going to call Pastor Hughes Pastor Hughes. Anybody can call me whatever they want. And on the subject of introducing people with titles, Pastor Hughes, when I first got out of rabbinical school, I was insistent on being just called Jonathan, and uh, because I came from a rabbinic tradition where the rabbi is just another person. Uh, so it's a very interesting question.
Interesting, yeah.
Something as we talk about Pastor Hughes, he wrote a number of years ago in response to this question, how can the church, actually Christian faith as such, build bridges between people in the United States? And you first said, I'm unsure of this question. Uh, you
Mm.
know, are you asking how a specific church can be the bridge, or the church as a body being a bridge? And to be honest, no church can ever be a bridge between people because the church is the people.
Mm.
Racism, bigotry, sexism, these are all the integral aspects of the human condition, unfortunately. And the church is a microcosm, a cross section of the human condition. Love is the ultimate bridge. And we believers, we, the church, must first let love inform our interactions with each other and the world. We
Mm.
must let love consume us from the inside out. Then racism and all human divisions become obsolete, which I think is a very good sort of caveat for all of us today. that let's focus less on institutional identity and more on our internal orientation that leads to an external change. Interestingly enough, I wrote something to introduce myself a little. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Freirish. I'm a rabbi who happens to be here in Buffalo doing coalition building and faith engagement on my own until I find more sustainable income, and hopefully I will still do it. But in the meantime, that brings us to trying to be better accomplices against racism and injustice for all. So I wrote a piece in the Times of Israel blogs last week, and one of the blurbs from that piece is this: helpful religions and theologies lead us on lifelong journeys of learning and becoming. They challenge us to grow in humility and humanity and facilitate greater connecting and community. I believe that a helpful religious experience may lead us to feelings of awe in the face of wondrous mystery of the universe, feelings of deep connection to a heritage shared with extended family and communities, all of which should contribute eventually to motivation and energy towards devotion to living and acting in better concert with others. Helpful religions and theologies can aid us in becoming people who build better multicultural societies and continue to become good, responsible neighbors within them. So, with those interesting caveats from both of us in our past, now we're going to shift to a very interesting question, which is, first of all, how well or how poorly we represent the history that informs what we do on any given moment. And a question that was raised. So my stepsister, my sister-in-law, sorry, who is my half sister-in-law, Elise Asbury Payne, recommended a book for me to read, which I read in preparation for this session. This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed by Charles E. Cobb Jr. And the subtitle is How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. And Charles Cobb was in the middle of the civil rights movement. He was one of the first SNCC secretaries in Jackson, Mississippi in the late 50s and the early 60s, and knew everybody and was in the middle of everything. And you, Pastor Hughes, also recommended a reading for us, which I put in the notice for today, which focuses on Monroe, North Carolina.
Yes.
And so here's this question. You and I have lofty ideals.
Can you
We
read
can't
that?
see that.
Okay, never mind. I tried.
You and I have lofty ideals about love and working together and all those good things. And yet here, what we are confronting is a history of the civil rights movement that almost starkly contradicts the image of the civil rights movement.
Yes.
When we read Dr. King past the I Have a Dream speech, we see in Dr. King a great devotion to the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi as brought into the United States via one of his teachers, and a focus on nonviolence as the way of getting things done. And certainly in a broad brush, we can look back at the 1960s and the effect of stalwart and brave African-American activists and their allies standing in front of horrendous violence, and whether it was at a lunch counter in Woolworths in North Carolina, or in front of billy clubs and fire hoses in Selma, Alabama, that was a transformative moment for American culture, we like to think. And it was maintained by the idea that there are horrendous, terrible, tyrannical people doing horrendous, terrible, tyrannical things to people who are just asking for their dignity to be upheld by the law that's already on the books. But this is not the whole story.
No, it's not the whole story.
And you, as a former Marine, would tell us that there's a whole lot accomplished because the people accomplishing it are supported by other people who have guns.
Yes. And I think the big caveat to this entire conversation is, well, history is always written by the victor. And so, and so our understanding of the civil rights movement is very redacted. It's very redacted. There are so many aspects of the movement itself that no one knows about. There were so many things that happened not really behind the scenes, but they just were never lifted up in history, and so we don't know about it. Dr. King's nonviolent approach was one stream of thought out of many streams of thought that permeated the entire civil rights movement, and yet that's his stream of thought is the one stream of thought that is so heavily propagated and talked about and lifted up. We have a Martin Luther King Day. We have all of these things that celebrate nonviolence, but that wasn't the entire story of the civil rights movement. And so, this book here, the Cobb book and the other book, Negroes with Guns by Robert Williams, they sort of highlight those things that history does not cover. They don't talk about how Dr. King needed bodyguards, armed bodyguards. They don't talk about how, well, and maybe this hasn't been mentioned before, but when Dr. King was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel, another pastor who was with him told the guards to go home. I'm not going to say his name, but he's still alive. And, karma, yeah. Anyway, what goes around comes around. But I almost said something I shouldn't say. And the same thing happened with Malcolm X. It was Malcolm X's.
I do believe you mentioned somebody whose name is no longer their name. So,
Yes, right. And Malcolm X's at the Audubon Ballroom, his assassination happened because his armed guards left. They were told to leave. And so there is this other side of the civil rights movement that was heavily predicated on being armed and armed to the teeth, in fact.
So one of the things, and I'm interested because I haven't read the Robert Williams book, but Charles Cobb goes vignette by vignette, both through his personal experience and through the experience of those he interviews, to talk about, there's an organization in Louisiana called Deacons for Defense and Justice.
Yes.
There's an organization in Monroe, North Carolina, actually modeled on them. All of those come after he recounts the experience of actually visiting Dr. King's home and seeing the amount of firearms that are actually in Dr. King's home for self-defense. And he posits a very interesting question, which is Dr. King's home was firebombed and no one was hurt. And, Malcolm X's home was also firebombed as well in Queens. Charles Cobb asks, would the course of the civil rights movement have been shifted drastically had any of Dr. King's family been injured or, God forbid, killed in that firebomb? Would that have changed things?
I think it would have changed things drastically. I think, well, because Dr. King's mother was actually assassinated in church, and she was the organ player. Like, she played the organ, bless her heart. And someone stood up in the church and gunned her down during worship service. And so I would say that, yes, if any one of Dr. King's children had been injured in that firebomb, I think the movement would have taken a very drastic turn. Just as if when Malcolm X's when Malcolm X's home was firebombed, if any of his children had been killed in that firebomb, the movement would have taken a very different turn. I think the fears of white people at the time, and to a certain extent even today, the fears of white people would have been revealed, would have come into manifestation if those respective families had been injured by those actions. Because and we saw this reflected more so in Malcolm X's situation, that you get this big image of the famous image of Malcolm X looking out the window with a loaded rifle. That was after the firebomb. right? And so that was a very galvanizing image to both African Americans and to white people. They were afraid that this would have been the jump off to something much more militant, and so, but the threat has always been there. The threat of a militant black uprising has been there since Nat Turner and
Well,
the slave rebellions.
and even earlier, and Cobb does a very,
Yes, he does.
interesting job of outlining the degree of sort of black armed
Yes,
traditions,
yes.
which I think is really important to recognize. And therefore, he highlights what he identifies as a key difference, a difference between a lifestyle of nonviolence
Mm,
and a tactic of nonviolence.
yes.
And so he talks about, Northerners, African Americans and white Americans both coming to the South and doing the real organizing work with
Mm-hmm.
for voter registration, for
Mm-hmm.
and how at the heart of that was relationship building in the community,
Mm-hmm.
living in people's homes, who were hosting them, who would never, great heroes of the movement like Fannie Lou Hamer, who, famously defended their homes
Oh yeah.
with guns.
Yes.
Uh, and and so that these ideologically rigid movement people on the nonviolent front come into contact with the real people who are defending their lives and their homes by virtue of having firearms.
Yeah.
Because turns out that uh, white supremacist racists are mostly cowards.
Yes.
And if a home is shown to be armed and defended, they will mostly run away.
Right.
Unless, now, there are tons of situations, unfortunately, where the well-armed African-American defenders and their allies are significantly outnumbered and overwhelmed, and therefore we end
Mm-hmm.
up with terrible massacres
Right.
all the way through the civil rights era,
Right.
from the death of from the fight for Reconstruction and its ending in the 1860s all the way through the 1960s.
Right.
We have terrible, terrible violence.
Right.
So there's this deep dialogue between the need for self-defense on the one hand, the need for principled actions that are
Mm-hmm.
nonviolent on the other,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of an overarching understanding, even by those who are proponents of a serious self-defense, that armed resistance does not have a good outcome
Right.
because there's a certain futility just in the numbers game,
Mm.
that you cannot get enough people, enough African Americans and allies armed to actually overcome white supremacist armed America.
Mm. At
Uh,
least that's the hope, right? That's the hope. And again, you know what? I think that goes back to what I said earlier. I think that is, and I hate to use the word propaganda, but I can't think of a better term for it right now. I think that's part of the propaganda machine. I think the propaganda machine rewrites the narrative for a specific reason. Think, and you again, I keep going back to Malcolm X. Wonder why? Um, he was always brought to task about that the difference between nonviolence and violence. And in every instance, when he's questioned about violence, when he's questioned about specifically his brand of violence, he always countered with with basically why is it that when white supremacists, racists, um, enact violence on us, why is our us exercising our right to defend ourselves considered violence? He would always say, you don't see anyone from the Nation of Islam going out in the streets putting on black robes and torches, riding horses and whatnot, and brandishing weapons and threatening white people. You don't see that. What you see is white people putting on white robes and hoods and terrorizing black families And then you see Black families protecting themselves. And so why is it that when Black people defend themselves, which is a right, why is that considered violence? And you never hear that said to Martin Luther King. King is never questioned about that, right?
Well, so I mean, there's a whole lot of trajectories of that. Nanette says, Pastor Hughes, she woke up early enough to watch your services 2 Sundays ago when you baptized the baby. So we
Yes.
appreciate you, Nanette. We know that early mornings are not your friends.
I love the babies. I love the babies.
So the couple of trajectories here on this about, so often we have who is speaking gets better or worse attention. So,
Right.
Stokely Carmichael, when he spoke the words Black Power, Charles Cobb identifies it as sort of a moment of incredible change in the movement.
Yes. Big
Uh,
shift.
and without any understanding of either by Stokely Carmichael or by African Americans of the sort of catalyst for horrendous backlash that the words Black Power would be in America on the one hand. The we can look at the beginning of the Black Panther movement and how it is the catalyst for gun control in California, because as soon as African Americans are seen carrying guns in Sacramento, suddenly California needs stricter gun laws.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and of course the unequal application of the law. And this on the one hand, and Cobb recollects a very interesting incident where a black farmer had his gun taken away by a police action in a small town in rural Mississippi.
Yeah,
And
Moses.
that's right.
Bob Moses,
And
yeah.
and he goes and he doesn't know how to read, but
Right.
he's with all of these activists from SNCC, and they show him the Second Amendment, and he takes the textbook with the Second Amendment and goes to the sheriff of the town and gets his gun back.
Yes.
And part of this, so let's accept maybe that there's a significant difference between Southern gun culture and Northern gun culture here as well.
Oh, yeah.
Or let's just say rural gun culture.
Yeah, because because in the rural gun culture, it's almost, man, to live in the, because I grew up in the country. I grew up in the countries of Georgia, Hiram, Georgia, 45 minutes 45 minutes west of Atlanta and an hour and a half east of the Alabama border. And everyone had a gun. Everyone had a gun. And it wasn't because of just for self-defense, but it was also, we hunted. We hunted animals. We had license to hunt deer. We had license to hunt ducks. We had licenses to do that. And my grandfather had a whole arsenal of guns. He had shotguns for birds. He had rifles for four-legged game, and he taught us how to use these weapons. None of it, he never mentioned about shooting anybody. It was always about, well, if you're going to eat, you're going to need to kill, right? And so that was the culture. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that, yes, even from the rural to the city, that was different. Because when you get to the city, and people have guns in the city, it's always about self-defense, always about protection, right? And yet you're using the same weapons, which I always find fascinating. And so, the Cobb talks about that in the book. He's saying that it was so ingrained in the culture of the South that it was difficult. It was a minefield trying to take guns away from people in rural Mississippi. You're like, why would you do that? Everyone has a gun in Mississippi, in the rural areas of Mississippi. So, you have a different dynamic in the South than you do in the North, right? And in the rural areas as opposed to urban areas.
So so this is something that you've raised obliquely that I'm really interested in, that I think is an outcome of Cobb's book and a rethinking of this history. As proponents for progress, dare we call ourselves progressives, as those who want to see a better society, one of the things that both Cobb points out and you point out as well is that before King could march, before and we saw this with the Deacons of Defense in Louisiana over and over again, before any action could take place, there needed to be a sense that those who were doing the action, nonviolent as it may be, would be defended.
Yes.
And I think in missing this history, we have lost the degree to which our rights need to be defended first. That the first step towards equal rights in this country is defense of the claim for them. That freedom may only come after we've defended the right to actually demand it. That justice may only come after we've defended the idea that all of us have a right to it. And that therefore self-defense, and let's say it organized communal self-defense, should be seen as more of a norm. I mean, I hesitate to even broach this hypothetical, but we had a terrible, violent massacre less than 2 miles from my home here in Buffalo at the Tops on Jefferson Avenue. Is that possible if, I mean, you know, this is the NRA argument, right? Is that possible if people are known to have a history, a tradition of self-defense in the Cold Springs neighborhood of the east side of Buffalo?
Yeah, case in point, in Atlanta, well, in Georgia, about 40 minutes northeast of Atlanta, there's a city called Kennesaw. It is a home of Kennesaw State University. Kennesaw, the city of Kennesaw has a standing ordinance that every homeowner must have a weapon. They must have some type of home defense system. And I don't live there, so I've not seen this for myself, but because I've been around Kennesaw State University often, and I have family that lives up there, and I have friends that live up there, everyone has a weapon. And their big claim is, well, we have the lowest crime rate in the country. And I haven't seen those numbers particularly, but it leads credence to your statement that if everyone is armed, if every home is armed, then it is a deterrent for theft, it is a deterrent for violence, it is a deterrent. But the flip side, go ahead.
Right. The flip side of that, right, is what we're concerned about.
Right.
That unlawful gun ownership leads to rampant gun violence and crime.
Well, I wouldn't say unlawful ownership is the problem. I would just say everyone having a gun is the problem. Period. I would say that everyone own. Can I be honest? Going to Kennesaw is terrifying for me because I don't have a weapon. I don't walk around with a weapon. I don't live in Kennesaw, and so it was terrifying when someone had to tell me I'm going to a house party in Kennesaw, and the person invited me to the party said, "Do you have a gun?" And I was like, "No, I don't have a gun." He said, "Okay, well, everybody here has one." That was terrifying for me. I'm going to a party. I'm an adult. We're all adults. And yet I have to be mindful that I'm probably going to be one of the few people in there who is not armed. And so to me, that's problematic.
It is problematic. I mean, you know, I come from a household, right? Ginny, my significant other, is a principled pacifist and a principled, you know, against gun ownership in all its forms. We lived in North Carolina for 5 years with, you know, when Jude was, so it was 2011 to 2016. So he was from 4 to 9 years old. And we came up with a rule that if he were in a home where there were firearms unsecured, that he would ask the parents to call us and we would pick him up.
Excellent.
You know,
Excellent.
I have family who live in
Yeah.
North Carolina who are very well armed.
Yes.
And we, our children have spent time in their homes and we trust that their firearms are secured.
Right.
Uh, I don't want to live in a heavily armed society. But then again, I have a luxury. I live on a street in Buffalo, New York, with a former police commissioner, the current police commissioner, and the current chief of detectives.
Right.
None of our homes are filled with firearms because the police presence on our street is astounding. Now,
right.
I like to say that our street gets plowed before the mayor's.
Right. And that sort of goes back to, you talked about the Black Panther Party earlier. I mean, that was one of the principal talking points for the Black Panther Party was police presence, and how the people of the Black communities in LA and Chicago and all other places did not feel safe. Even with police presence, they did not feel safe. And
well, the
so
police presence doesn't make African Americans feel safe.
Exactly.
Because the police presence is designed for African American suppression.
Exactly. And so they felt like, well, since you're supposed to protect and serve, but you're not protecting or serving us at all, we will do it ourselves. And so oftentimes that did pit civilians against the police, because the police were the terrorists in that scenario. And so you have this, it's a big difference between in your community, your neighborhood, having police presence, and in an African American community or neighborhood having a police presence.
So, and again, recognizing that defense is the unacknowledged precursor to rights.
Yes.
So, I had this sort of aha moment that it was the deacons of defense and justice. That defense came before justice. And we think about, the organization of the March on Washington. And how many police officers from New York were enlisted to defend the March on Washington.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And trained in nonviolent suppression.
Yes.
To guard the safety of the protesters.
Incidentally, it was Baynard Rustin who made that concerted effort. He said, if we're going to do this, we have to be protected. That was part of the organizing of the entire event, was who's going to protect us? Who's going to look out for us?
And if we look in the Jewish community as an incredibly unusual microcosm, whether we're starting at any point, and we could pick the massacre of the Pittsburgh synagogue a number of years ago, up to and including the last week's events, complicated to even begin to enter that as they are on campus, where Jewish students are being accosted. And as some people say, if there's no action in a protest now, the protest is seen as futile, because the whole point of the protest is to gain attention, and therefore there has to be something controversial going on in order to gain attention. So stopping a fellow Jewish student from going to classes on account of their being Jewish. So if you go to synagogue today, you're going to encounter a significant amount of armed defense.
Right.
Here in Buffalo, Congregation Shir Shalom is the place where our community religious school takes place. And there are 2 uniformed Amherst police officers, 2 or 3, there every Sunday during religious school.
It must be nice.
They know how far I run.
Yeah.
When I drop off Sadie there.
Yeah.
No, oh no, the community's paying for it. That they're not there as volunteers.
Yeah,
They're
no, I
not
mean,
there assigned. The Jewish community has reached out to the Amherst police force and asked for them and pays for them. This is not,
mhm.
some sort of uh
Well,
service done to the
and
Jewish
more to
community.
your point, they did that because they valued your life. They valued the life of the community. They valued the institution as doing a service to the community. We want you to continue living your life and observing your religion in safety. We want you to be safe going to temple. We want you to be safe, right? And I'm saying, and I'm being sarcastic when I say it must be nice because I, as an African American, did not get that same courtesy when after the Tops massacre. I had to lobby, I had to fight, I had to make a case for having an armed guard because I did not feel safe. And the response was, "Oh, you'll be fine." Uh, you know what I mean? And so it, you're right.
No, and Nanette, who's on the call, was with me at a multi-faith gathering, and we'll get to her comment in a second, in Amherst, where
Mm.
African Americans protested that they would not come because of the Amherst police. So, uh,
Exactly.
right. So Nanette writes, in the famous debate in London between James Baldwin and William Buckley, Buckley makes a thinly veiled threat at the end that I think is wrongly overlooked. He says something along the lines of, quote, if Black people rise up in violence, America is ready to get busy, unquote. It always stuns me that he doesn't acknowledge the Black uprising that he is warning against has always been in response to white
Exactly.
violence against Blacks.
Exactly. Exactly. It's always been there. It's always been under the surface. It's always been, right?
And Vicky points out, Vicky and I were uh, met in Charlotte, and Shalom Park is so Shalom Park, for those of you who don't know, Charlotte is a 50 plus acre complex in South Charlotte suburb in Charlotte, North Carolina, not quite in the suburbs, with two synagogues, a JCC, all of the offices of the Jewish Federation. It's where Jewish day camps take place. It's got, tennis courts and swimming pools.
Mm,
It's quite astounding. It was created as a community response to arson in the 1970s. The
mhm,
Amity Center, as it was called, was the original
mhm,
Jewish center. It was burned to the ground in the 1970s, and the Jewish community came together and built Shalom Park, where they also built the two synagogue buildings.
mhm.
It and Vicky points out she was there when it burned.
Wow.
Uh, the Jewish that complex, I very well knew the security guards. We had its own security force.
Hmm.
And the person who runs that security force is a major part of the Jewish Community Administration
Hmm.
in Charlotte,
Yeah.
and uh, and that the idea, and so Vicky points out we all pay for that protection out of our pockets. So the question is really, when individual communities are paying for security forces,
Hmm.
when individual communities feel unsafe from the threats of the quote unquote security force being provided by the state,
Hmm.
what are we to do? Because that's a failure of our society.
It is. It is a failure of our society, and I don't know if there's anything that we can do. Honestly, I don't think that you know the deacons of defense was the answer to the question, right? The deacons of defense, the Knights of Liberty, the Knights of Tabor. These were all organizations that were the Black Panther Party. They answered that question. They were the ones who said, we don't trust, we don't feel safe in our communities. We don't trust police in our communities. And so we will defend our own communities. We'll set up patrols in our own communities. And I think that was very successful, especially when we're talking about the Black Panther Party. They were very successful in policing the Black community. The problem with that was not so much armed Black men, and in some cases women, roaming the streets after curfew. The problem was the Black Panther Party was instrumental in in addressing the root of the crime and the root of the violence in the Black community. They were drawing membership away from gangs. They were getting gang members to come together to build a community instead of destroy the community. And that was a threat to white supremacy, because now you got gangs who are, I guess, violent already, violent prone, and but it was okay because they were pointing their guns at each other. It's all right when Black people kill each other, but when Black people say, "Oh no, hey, let's not point the guns at each other. Let's point the guns at them," then that became a problem. This is why Fred Hampton was assassinated in Chicago, because he was one of the few Black leaders of the day who was able to get 7 gangs in Southside Chicago to have a ceasefire and to get and talk together. I mean, he got gang members, he got Black gangs, he got Latin gangs, he got white gangs. He got them all to sit at the table together and to talk about, hey, how can we empower our community? How can we keep? How could he was getting tutors? He was teaching them. They were getting resume. He really galvanized a community, and that was a threat, because now you have an army who's already, they know how to use guns. They already know how to fight and to shoot and to kill, right? So that was a big issue.
So it begs the question about the nature of our community organizing.
Mm.
Because Rep. Tanya writes, I listened to a podcast a few years ago, and David Banner made the statement that if Black people begin to arm themselves and join the NRA, only then will things change.
Yeah. Well, did you see the video I sent you,
Yes.
John? It's classic. It's funny. I wish we could play it here. It's hilarious. It's meant to be funny, but it was also very satirical. Can we play it? Or will we get?
It's going to take too long. We'll
Okay,
play it next
right.
time.
So anyway, and I'll set it up as best I can. So it's basically it's a PSA for the NRA. The NRA is recruiting people, and you have these 2 white men, one who's sort of like a cowboy figure, and the other who's sort of he looks like a yuppie or a buppy or whatever, and a yuppie. And they're talking about Second Amendment rights and how these rights to bear arms should not be infringed, yada yada. And then in the middle of this conversation, in comes this Black Panther-esque Black man with bullets on his with the bullet chain and the rifle, saying, yes, our right to protect ourselves cannot be infringed. And the white guys are like, yeah, right. And so they go back and forth, these NRA talking points, this America patriotism talking points. And the Black guy in the middle was like, that's right, we're going to defend ourselves by any means necessary. And it's got the white guys very nervous. And that's exactly what you're saying. It's like, okay, you have these rights, but then are we sure we want these people to have those rights? Are we sure we want to defend?
Here's the deal. We were asked about accomplices.
Yeah.
And there's a fundamental problem with African American separatism historically, right? The idea that, and Malcolm X explored this, the idea that there could be a African American separatist, isolationist, independent community to solve a segregation solution to racism.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about this a lot next time, so I'm setting this up because that's part of the conversation between Dr. King and Malcolm X. So let's start with the fact that if we're going to change anything, we need an integrationist movement, that we actually need all of us working together in the movement. The movement itself needs to be, because we need to avoid the irony and the sarcasm and the humor of the idea of, an armed black man showing up to an NRA meeting, because what we need is the meeting to start with everybody there.
That's it.
It
Yeah.
needs to start with the presumption that we all need our rights defended.
Right. And I think that was sort of what got Malcolm X in trouble, was that he agreed with that statement, but in his understanding of it, he felt like, well, first, let's empower Black people first. Let's empower the so-called Negro in America, so that when we do get to the table, we come to the table as equals. I think for him, it was less of, yeah, let's come together, kumbaya, let's hold hands, let's work together. But if I come together with you as an inferior, then we're not really together, are we? And
Well, and
so,
I will, and you actually provide the counterpoint to Malcolm X on this,
mhm,
which is that from the position of extractionist capitalism,
mm,
all of us are diminished. And therefore, all of us, while we may have slightly different positions at the table, we are all under the boot.
yes, we are.
We may not be all under the boot together, right?
Mm, yeah.
As the saying goes, we're not in the same boat, but we are in the same storm.
Yes, 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 yes.
And that being the case, if we don't come together in multiple boats to figure out how to weather the storm and actually stop the damage,
Yeah.
then because there we will continue to be divided and conquered
Yeah,
if we
and
don't do
and
that.
and, and more to that point, man. And you used my quote. You quote me. You're the only person that I know who actually quotes me, which I don't know. This does wonders for my fragile ego. But you you quoted me when I talked about love being the ultimate bridge, and and that's all I preach. If I'm preaching something on Sunday, love is in there somewhere, because I do believe that. I stand by that. But what people interpret when people hear me talk about love, they interpret that love as this agape love that's just, oh, it's just a love for everybody. And that's not exactly what I'm talking about, because I feel that in the same way that Malcolm X feels like in order for us Black people, African American people, marginalized people to be at the table, we have to have our own understanding of ourselves, and we have to have our own dignity, and that dignity needs to be respected. We have to be at the table as equals, or as Dr. King would say, as brothers. And so I feel that when I talk about love as the bridges the gap, that's also love for myself. That's also Black love. That's also love for my own people. And when I talk about loving yourself and loving your people, that with that love comes empowerment. And so I feel that because I love my people, I feel that our people need to be empowered. And I agree with Malcolm X, is that every time we keep trying to go to the table, sit at the table, that we're not wanted.
Well, but that's
And
because we are attempting to integrate the wrong tables as opposed to
exactly.
building a better table,
That's
right?
right. That's
We
right.
need to convene the new table,
Yes.
where wherever we come from, whatever we come from, whatever our backgrounds are, we are welcomed and celebrated at the table, understanding that some of us are going to have certain advantages that others
Yeah.
don't. And that
Yeah.
each and every single individual one of us, if we approach with agape love, if we
Mm,
approach with siblinghood,
mm,
then we are going to recognize that my advantages are often disadvantages.
right.
They may be disadvantages in listening or
Right.
hearing or understanding or sympathizing.
Right.
Or they may be other disadvantages. They may be health outcome disadvantages. They may be they may be educational disadvantages.
Yes.
And so if we don't rebuild the table, if we don't
Yes.
reconvene the table, and here is where I'm going, and this is where I'm hoping we will go together,
All
and
right. Here
because
we
we're
go.
about to open up for questions, but I want to um, tease our next meeting. Our next meeting is going to include one of my favorite people and partners in accomplices in attempting to do better, Dr. Gabriel Atchison, who is a PhD in sociology and anthropology and an amazing women's studies and LGBTQ studies scholar. And she is asking us to review this book, which I'm putting in. Oh, I thought I was putting in here. I'll put the link in. Which is a book that when Pastor Hughes and I first met, he recommended to me. The Martin Malkin in America, Dream or Nightmare book. And so I put the link to it in. So that's what we're going to be doing in 2 weeks. But my goal, so last time, and we'll open it up for questions in a minute. Last time, Pastor Hughes, you and I came to an idea, I think, of a need for a confessional movement, a movement that acknowledges that there's not a single one of us, regardless of background, regardless of righteousness, that isn't part of a social grouping, a family grouping, a background that needs to atone for sins in America. There is no blameless group. And so that's a good starting point for sort of a confessional movement. And
Yeah.
then I think we also need to have a movement of defense with that bigger table. Or let's call it a different table.
A different table. You're speaking my language. So in the Christian tradition, we have what's called Pentecost, right? And Pentecost is coming up on May the 19th. It marks the birth of the church. And the story goes.
Well, actually, it marks 49 days after the second day of Passover.
Yeah,
but
right. But it's been colonized. But the story but the story goes that the disciples of Christ were in the upper room, and Peter was preaching, and as he was preaching, the Holy Spirit descended and lit everyone up on fire, and they were speaking in languages, and other people heard their own language, and so there's the miracle of Pentecost. And the theme is always fire. And it's talking about fire, and they say that in Christian lore, it's the same fire that burned the burning bush with Moses and all that stuff. And I'm a Pentecost loving preacher, because I always imagine the fire of Pentecost literally burning the table, because we have this idea that it was from that point that the church began. And it's like, well, they were gathered at a table, and when the Holy Spirit came down, the table was set on fire, figuratively, because at that point, the new table needed to be built. And I'm not saying that what we call communion and Eucharist is that table, but at the same time, there's room for that there. And I totally agree with this idea that we need to burn the table and build a new one, because I don't believe that we will ever be able to rebuild or repair what we have now. There's no hope for it. We have to do something different.
So building a new table, we've got a couple movement ideas here.
Yeah.
But we want to hear from everybody else who's here if you have questions. Sorry. So no, it's okay. I have given you the opportunity to start your to unmute and start your camera. So if you'd like, I know we have some amazing people on the call with us. Two other, a bunch of other religious leaders, Reverend Tanya, Elder Gerard, Pastor Bruce. So and Allison and Tay and Chuck. Helene, all of you and Vicky, all of you are leaders in your own right. So by all means, any one of you who has a question, feel free to ask, a comment, go right ahead. Hi, Vicky.
Hi. Nice to see everybody.
Nice to see you too. Hi, Tay. No questions. We've kept everyone quiet.
No, I don't think quiet is the word. I think maybe a bit overwhelmed with everything that's going on. It's I'm really working hard. If you go on Temple Bethel's website, you can hear about what we have a new associate rabbi, Rabbi Alexis Erdheim, and I mean she's young, baby. What can I tell you? Um, um, she went to Columbia for her undergrad, and her mom taught at Barnard. So she was talking about how we can hold multiple things at the same time. And I think that goes along here too, that we need to hold multiple things at the same time, different issues at the same time. Doesn't make one right. It's not black and white. There are plenty of shades in between. And how can we come together and listen, not just respond, but really listen to one
So
another?
Vicky, I have heard from another rabbi a beautiful response to exactly what you're talking about. So one of the projects I'm working on right now is with the Reconstructing Judaism has a Tikkun Olam commission, Repair the World commission, and particularly we are looking at reparations in synagogue life, how to deal with racist incidents in the community. And I was speaking with a rabbi at a synagogue in outside Chicago, and Rabbi Rachel Weiss, and she offered this amazing insight. She said they had tried to come up with a code of conduct. This is our expectations in response to a couple of incidents. And the challenge that they ran into was that the code of conduct was too punitive. And people wanted to throw people out. And what she found was that when she, as a community, further investigated some of their challenge moments, that all of them were moments of pastoral care issues. That it turns out when we approach a situation of conflict, not as who's right and who's wrong, but what suffering has led to this situation, who is struggling in this situation, and why. In other words, can we, in fact, defuse situations instead of by saying, oh, no, you broke the rules, by saying, it feels like something went wrong here. It feels like you said something that you didn't mean to say, or you didn't understand it. Can we talk? Can we do the hard work of relationship building between one another instead of enforcing rules? So I thought that was a very interesting comment, especially in light of, trying to hold multiple things in our minds at the same time with regard to what's going on campuses all over the country right now. Thank you, Vicki. Anybody else have any? Welcome, everybody. And I see it's not Chuck Zoasco, but Sally. So my apologies for misidentifying you. I now see who you are. Oh, Chuck is there too. It's
There
both
he
of you.
goes. Where my two favorite troublemakers.
We have there's a lot of troublemaking on the call.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So you put in the video that you mentioned, so we can all so anybody who wants to the record of the call, just ask me. I will send you the chat record afterwards, so you can email me afterwards. Rabbi Erdheim also said it is necessary to be curious, says Vicky. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think this is really so key. When someone says something that offends me, instead of taking offense, let's ask why.
Yes. Okay. That has been one of the most bridging things that I have ever done in my life. Learning how to, in the face of being offended, learning how to lean into the offense and to ask questions. Being in different cultures, working in other parts of the world, being in places where a person that looks like me is not normal. I was in China. I did a mission trip to China one time, and I was amazed at the racism in China, and how they treated me as an African American. And it wasn't until I began asking questions, why do you treat Black people this way? And they look at me like, we don't even know we've never seen Black people before. We don't know what you're talking about. No one is treating you particularly in a certain way because you're Black. We've never seen you before. And so I had to ask questions so that I didn't feel like I was being discriminated against. And it keeps my blood pressure down because rather than for me to get emotional and wound up and twisted up, I've learned to ask questions. And in so doing, I've been able to have meaningful conversations with people, even people who were intentionally racist or intentionally offensive. I even then was able to have a conversation with them that demonstrated my willingness to not be violent in the face of your ignorance or your perception of me. I won't let that affect me, but I want to have a conversation about why you feel the way you feel. So it has been transformative for me.
All right. Thank you so much,
questions.
Pastor Hughes. So Pastor Hughes, you have a colleague on who's raised her hand. Reverend Tanya, like you, is in the very interesting position of being an African-American clergy person, faith leader, serving a mostly white community, or in Reverend Tanya's case, two mostly white communities. So Reverend Tanya, you raised your hand. You have a question or a comment?
Yes, so the comment I wanted to make was, thinking about what you just said, Pastor Wiley, all of it is all about relationships, right? It's about getting to know the people that you're in the room with, the people that you're encountering, but we have to be intentional about wanting to know the people that we're coming in contact with, right? Instead of making assumptions, we go in saying, you know what? I'm going to be intentional about forming a relationship,
Right.
even if it's temporary for 5 minutes, but I'm going to form a relationship. So moving forward, I know where they stand. They'll know where I stand.
Right.
Just by a simple introduction of, who we are. And we find out that indeed we have many things in common.
Right.
And more in common than we have differences. And start there. This conversation was very interesting. I'm sorry I came in late, and you were talking about the guns and everything. How can I say this? So I've been robbed a few times.
Yeah.
Right? I used to be a trustee, and I used to have to make the deposit. And after I got robbed the second time and they took all the church's money, and I came under investigation because they thought that I was stealing the money.
Right.
And it had nothing to do with me. It had to, people watch.
Yeah.
And they robbed me. And the other trustees and the deacons took me in and had a meeting and said, you need a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, why do I need a gun? They said, you need a gun to protect yourself, if nothing else, so that they can see that you're not as vulnerable
Right.
as you have been. That if they attempt to do something, they may have a run for their money. That's how it was explained to me.
Mm-hmm.
They said, because twice they've taken the church's money.
Yep.
They couldn't recoup that. They couldn't get that back.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm not going to do any more I'm just not going to do that. But I understand the mentality where they were coming from, not for me to exercise the force, the violence that I could because of what's happening, but let them know, be careful, you might get what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd like to acknowledge an amazing thing that's happened with us all here today. And first of all, I'm so grateful to all of you for being here. But, and Reverend Tanya, I'm really appreciative of you sharing with us all, because one of the things that has happened is we've created a middle ground here. We have created, we've actually started to inhabit a space between, you know, what Cobb lays out as a lifestyle of nonviolence and self-defense. So Reverend Tanya said, and she stepped away, but said that instead of taking up a gun, she decided she was not going to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is a limitation of our freedoms.
Yes.
To say, okay, my choice here is I'm going to be armed or I'm not going to do something.
Right.
Now, that's a relatively free choice, right? To be armed or not to be armed, and therefore to do or not do that thing. But still, I don't think that's a choice at the heart of the freedoms that we're looking for.
Right.
That the only way I am free is if I'm armed.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll talk about this at our next session when you're talking about Malcolm and Martin, how eventually toward the ends of their careers, their ideologies began to converge. Because on the one hand, Martin was all about nonviolence, but at the same time, Martin understood nonviolence didn't mean doing nothing, right? And he was saying that, you know, yeah, it's nonviolent, but we're still doing something. And what we're doing is not violent, but we are still agitating. And he talks about being agitators, being disruptors. He's talking about nonviolent protest, but we're still protesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how Malcolm was saying, well, at first, Malcolm was saying, well, no, you know, we must respond violence with violence. And toward the end of his career, he realized, you know what, that might not be the best thing to do. Instead, I am going to defend myself. I'm going to be peaceful. He didn't say nonviolent, but he said, I'm going to be peaceful. And his direct line is, you know, be peaceful, be loving, be kind, but if they put their hands on you, send them to the cemetery. So it was this dichotomy between being nonviolent, but also not setting yourself up to be bullied or to be, you know, have violence acted on you, to give people a deterrent. So they were coming together. They were converging. We'll talk about that next time. That's a good teaser.
We will talk about that. And again, I'm interested in all of you. We're going to have to end because I don't want to keep everybody here all day. But I'm interested very much in all of your thoughts about these ideas. One, the idea that we need sort of a table, rebuilt a table, and to some extent, we're asking people to come with confession in mind. How am I complicit in an America that's not the way I'd like it to be? Because only then do we come to a certain extent as acknowledging our equality at the table. So we've got sort of this confessional movement piece on the one hand, and another, I'm wondering if we have to undertake a rethinking of our title, that in fact, we are not accomplices for justice, we are accomplices for defense and justice. So with that, I'm gonna thank you all for being here. Pastor Hughes, thank you for your partnership in this. All of you are leaders in your own right, and I really appreciate you being here and offering questions and patience and partnership with us all. And I very much look forward to figuring out how we continue to turn this not just a conversation, but an action. So
rebuild the table, brother. Rebuild the table.
And so I have stopped